line. Tucker comes out. Kyle Tucker. This time they finish the job.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're watching. This is a refreshing episode of the Rosinbaggers podcast, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Ty, buddy, how you feeling?
Feeling very refreshed, especially now that we just took a little sip of that Busch Latte Peach, which just came out. Seasonal Busch Latte here in the Midwest. It's not bad. It's a little sweet for my taste, but it does the job in the summertime. Refreshing in terms of a lot of different ways for me. Refreshing that we're talking baseball again, recapping the College World Series. Refreshing to be back in the chair here on the pod. Had a little health scare, unfortunately, a couple weeks ago that unfortunately sidetracked my plans to go to the College World Series, and we end up selling the tickets. And it's a gut punch. There was a situation where I had literally told the doctor, you know what, just go ahead and amputate my leg, put a prosthetic on, because I got a baseball game I'm going to go to in Omaha, and if you don't amputate this thing, I'm going to be really pissed. Unfortunately, they have this thing called a code of ethics that doctors abide by, and so they didn't, and they gave me penicillin instead. So unfortunately had to miss the College World Series, then missed the next pod because I had some reactions to that, but all through, all good on the health front, and really looking forward to talking baseball. Stove's going to be gone this week because he's got fireworks literally, but there have been some literal fireworks that happened in the majors that we're going to talk about, including a perfecto. Whoa. Does it count if it happens against the A's? Let's answer that question on the pod as we move along. But good to be back in here for the Rosinbaggers pod.
We're glad to have you back, bud. Glad your health is looking on the other side of things, and really good to see you back. Sucks you missed the World Series game, but a lot of fireworks. Speaking of fireworks, and on that note, the College World Series. If you haven't heard yet, you've been living in a cave. But LSU wins their 7th national championship, and maybe the most mind-boggling piece of that is that they are still 5 short of the all-time record. This speaks volumes to the dominance of USC from about 1965 until about 1998. 12 national titles. I mean, we know some of the alumni, maybe Mark McGuire, right near and dear to our hearts, but USC with just utter dominance for about 2.5, almost 3 decades. And LSU has been that team, at least for me, in terms of my time really focusing on watching the College World Series. LSU has been that team that, has been the one that it seems like they're the one that put it together most often. I know Texas has won a bunch as well, but they break their tie with Texas and get number 7 to move into sole possession of second place all time. One of the maybe all-time teams in terms of talent, but maybe just looking at the series itself, right? The final series with Florida and LSU. I didn't give Florida a lot of credit, maybe I'm a hater, right? I don't know. It's very possible that I'm a hater here, but Florida's got maybe the 3rd pick in the draft in Mr. Wyatt there, and LSU has 1 and 2 most likely. What a series, but what a team in LSU. And I want to get your thoughts, man, on Omaha. I know you missed the game in person, but great series. Great series from the first round on, too. We had a lot of interesting games.
Great series and great memories and great moments from great players. And that's what Omaha is all about. You mentioned a few of them, Mark McGuire and some of the other names that have come through. I think of guys like J.D. Drew and guys like Kramer Robertson and Adley Rutschman, whose names get etched in stone and really endeared into the hearts of those who just come as a neutral. What makes Omaha such a special place is that it does attract the broader portions of central Nebraska, Kansas, out in Missouri, and other places around the Midwest that just flock to see these college baseball players that people down in the South get to see every single day. And we make them front page news for 14 days of the year, and it's just truly special. And then you add in guys like Dylan Cruz this time, Big Paul with Paul Skeens, and these guys are going to be forever remembered for being a part of one of the all-time best college baseball teams that, quite frankly, we have ever seen from a roster composition standpoint. This was a team going into the year, LSU was, that I knew it would have talent. And it was just a matter of putting it all together. And yeah, they hit rough patches. It was the power of the stash. It was. I didn't break out the stash again this year to determine who wore it better. I think that it was all pretty told that between Matt Carpenter, Miles Michaelis, and myself last year, that I was the third man on the outside looking in. So I'm forgoing the stash for a while. But LSU certainly had the ability to be one of the best college baseball teams. And then as the season progressed and when the light shined the brightest, the big stars stepped up and the big stars played through. And what a pop and what an ovation these guys got. And then for Dylan Cruz to do what he did all the way until his very last at bat, his motor never stopped going. Mechanically, these guys are sound. And you look at the top 3 draft picks between Florida and Cruz and Paul Skeens, in all likelihood, top 3 draft picks, they cemented themselves into that top 3 spot in Omaha. They were certainly talented enough to be top 5 material, but then in the bright lights and on the big stage, they cemented themselves as primetime performers. And now you move along. Again, I said it from I look back at College World Series past, this LSU team is going to stick with me for a while because of how extremely well it was put together. You throw in guys like Ty Floyd and then Morgan III. Like, this team had it all, and they were so exciting to watch. And then to have the professionalism of the short memory, you got blown out 24-4 one night prior to the deciding game 3, and you absolutely flipped the script. It was out of sight, out of mind. It would have been so easy for any other baseball team, especially after going down early with the 2-run home run. And then you're thinking, oh my God, here we go again. But LSU, they hung tough, and they just had such a quick memory, and that is so crucial. Whether you're playing at the college game, whether you're playing at the professional level, or whether you're playing T-ball and coach pitch, to have that quick memory, you strike out, next time you're at bat, you're going to get a base knock. And that's what this team did. Everybody had a hit. Everybody had an RBI. Everybody contributed in that third and final decisive game. And while it lacked certainly on the excitement level and maybe the drama, it was, for me, so refreshing to see a team play that well and never let their foot off the gas, put their foot on the throat firmly of Florida, and continued to press down. This was a great college baseball team that, in my opinion, is probably one of the best that we will ever see. Congratulations to the LSU Tigers, and congratulations to the best fans in college baseball, and I don't say that lightly, and congratulations to shattering a Jello shot record that I thought would be untouchable thanks to Mississippi State. That's always fun to watch. The Jello shots, 64,000 for just LSU. Rocco's is doing fine and well. They paid a few bills. I think they'll stay in business again next year.
Yeah, for sure. That's at least a year's worth of operating expenses covered. Yeah, you put it perfectly, right? And Aaron, yeah, absolutely. Had a little bit of everything, a lot of pitching, right? We saw Skeens with his dominant performance in an elimination game for them. They knocked off Wake Forest, the number 1 team in the nation, coming in number 1 seed, and they lost game 1 and had to win games 2 and 3 in that to get to the final series against Florida. Saw upstart Oral Roberts, who had a chance against Florida, a team that ended up winning it, or winning that side of the bracket, and had a chance to win the series. Oral Roberts was really fun to watch. I'd actually picked them to win it, and I felt really good when they knocked off TCU, and then looking at them potentially knocking off Florida the way they were playing them. I thought they had a chance, but the wind kind of came out of their sails. They ran out of gas, and of course, you start to realize why they were a 4 seed in their regional. But LSU, man, we can't say enough about them. I think from Florida's perspective, from the losing side, you look at the fact that you've got Caglione coming back next year, who's going to be your ace, your number 1 hitter in your lineup, who he already was this year with 32 bombs. You got to feel pretty good about what you're bringing back, but man, LSU, what an assembly of talent. Going to bring Skeens in from Air Force, pairing him with what they already had there in Ty Floyd, and just watching those two in their 1-2 punch, just K-ing everybody. I have a little bit of a hot take on Ty Floyd. I think he has a chance to be a better major league pitcher than Paul Skeens, to be completely honest. I think his stuff off of his fastball is better than Skeens. I think Skeens has a more dominating presence. I think he throws obviously he's got more velocity, but I really, really think that Ty Floyd's changeup, being an eraser, has the potential for him to be a better major league pitcher. I just think he works off of his fastball maybe a little better than Skeens. I know Skeens had just otherworld stats this year, 12-2 with a 1.69. Would he end up with like 210 strikeouts, I think, this year, something like that? I like what Ty Floyd can do off of his fastball. And it's not to say like he throws low to mid 90s. He's got a lot of pop, a lot of life in that fastball, but that changeup reminds me of Trevor Hoffman's changeup. It is just filthy. The way that he throws it, same arm slot, same arm action, it is an eraser. And I think at the next level, that is a pitch that can take you from being a highly touted prospect to an elite pitcher at the next level. But Dylan Cruz, you can't say enough about Dylan Cruz. You said it on Facebook. He might hit 400 in the league. I don't think it's a stretch. Because he is a professional every single at bat. You mentioned the motor didn't stop from at bat 1 back in February to at bat, I think 316 or whatever it was. I don't know, 300 some plate appearances he had this year, and every one of them just professional through and through.
Well, what I watched with Dylan Cruz's bat was, more so than just professional. It was the situational awareness, and it was his ability to really handle any pitch in any location. And I think of when they flash the hot and cold zones on the show when you're playing your video games, and there's always a couple blue spots for every single hitter in baseball. I don't know that Dylan Cruz would have a single blue spot. It doesn't matter where the pitch is, and it's not like he's one-dimensional with it. He's going to pull the ball the other way. He's going to push the ball out into left. He's going to know a situation where he's got the infield playing back and just hit a little swinging bunt to use his speed to get on board. He knows exactly the defensive alignment, sees it before it happens, and he's got that visualization to know where he wants to put the ball. And more often than not, his athletic ability follows through with what he's got visioned in his head when he's at the plate. And he can do that all in the span of 15 seconds. It's remarkable what he does. And to that credit, I think that's got to be your number 1 pick from an offensive standpoint, a guy that's going to be in your everyday lineup for 162 games a year minus rest, and has that ability to get that sort of production towards the top. You can't shy away from that. On your argument about Big Paulie and Floyd, I will agree with you. Floyd's stuff is more versatile. He's got more in the arsenal. He has more to give. I look at Big Paulie, and I look at a workhorse, and we haven't seen a workhorse come out into the majors maybe since your Randy Johnsons, maybe since your Dwight Goodens, your Nolan Ryans, guys that are not just going to peter out at around 85 to 90 pitches. Paul Skeens, 140 pitches in that super regional contest. And oh, by the way, at pitch 140, was still throwing triple digits. We haven't seen that kind of stuff. That's stuff that Shohei can't even do on the mound.
Yeah.
And listen, at this point, if somebody can do something better than Shohei Ohtani, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said about that. He's a workhorse. He's a guy that you're going to give the ball to, that has the capability of throwing a complete game shutout anytime he's on the mound. And I don't think you can shy away from that. Even though Floyd has more versatility, even though Floyd has more to give in the arsenal, and even though that changeup and that off speed really can mess with batters in the box, to me, Skeens is still the higher pick because of what he can give you, and he never tires. That's outstanding.
Yeah,
we haven't seen
100%. And I wouldn't make the argument that Floyd should be drafted ahead of Skeens.
Sure.
Honestly, I just think that his stuff, I do look at it and I say that translates. At the major league level, I think he has an opportunity to be what Johan Santana kind of was from the left-hand side, with his fastball changeup combination, really keeping hitters off balance. And then the breaking stuff's pretty good. His slider's pretty good. Got some pretty good bite on it. You continue to work with that, and then you get a 3-pitch arsenal, and you really got a lot to work with for sure. I just think longer term, I look at what Floyd can do working off of his fastball. Maybe Skeens gets a little better off stuff, that those secondary pitches as he moves, but he's got that great equalizer, man. He can just reach back with that 6'7", I believe, 6'7" frame, and just go touch triple digits anytime he wants, no matter how many pitches he has thrown. You mentioned it, pitch 140, I believe, was thrown at 99 miles an hour. So,
and you know what else you love about both of them, whether it's Big Paul or whether it's Floyd, ain't one scenario, ain't one single situation, ain't any amount of pressure that phases these guys. They don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. They're going to go out and they're going to get their outs.
For sure. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. We've had a lot kind of going on in Major League Baseball, and I was prepared to kind of talk about how teams are doing and where we're sitting at in the standings, and trade deadlines kind of around the corner. It's a little farther in the season than it used to be when we were, growing up and watching baseball, but we're still, it's there in the horizon. All-Star games coming up here in a few weeks. All-Star voting just came out, but maybe overshadowing all of that was a surprise last night. A guy with a 5+ ERA in Domingo Germán faces the worst team in baseball. We'll admit that, right? You mentioned it. Of course, it comes against the Oakland Athletics, but he makes history. And if you're a Yankees fan, fun little tidbit for you, maybe you're feeling really good about this season, because in the history of the New York Yankees franchise,
good stuff,
every single season that they've had a perfect game, they have won the World Series, including the only World Series perfect game thrown by Mr. White. God, the names elude me. Help me out.
The first one.
Don Larson.
Yes.
Don Larson.
Yes.
I had Whitey Ford in my head, and I knew that wasn't it, and I could not get Whitey Ford out of my head. But all that aside, my hiccup aside, Yankees fans, maybe you're feeling really good about this year, because, as I said, every single season that a Yankees pitcher has thrown a perfect game, I think they have 4 in their history now. They had 3. This is number 4. Are they going to win the World Series this year? Ty, talk to me about the perfect game first. All that trending stuff that never really matters in the end aside.
And you got the Nuggets, right? You got the Don Larson. You got David Wells. You got David Cohn. You got Domingo Germán. So if I'm a Yankees scout, I am just scouting all starting pitchers that have the first name that starts with a letter D, and I think we're going to be good and probably get 28, 29 and the 30th World Championship. That's also an interesting little tidbit that I just now thought of when I was thinking about the 4 guys.
I'm glad you brought that up.
So, great stuff. But last night, again, anytime you have a perfect game, it is a remarkable athletic feat in the game of baseball. And in fact, probably the single greatest accomplishment that one single pitcher can do. It's still, it is like when Mad Bomb threw one in 7 innings, and it kind of didn't count because they were playing the 7-inning doubleheaders. And now you get this, you're playing a single A club essentially, and it's tough. I was on the right track with this, mind you, with the DraftKings and with my FanDuel and my fantasy baseball lineups. A day prior, I was on the scent, and listen, it's been a bad couple weeks for fantasy baseball for me, so I was looking for any kind of liner that I could take, and I took Brito, who was making his like first or second start this season against the Oakland A's. It didn't turn out terrible, and I was on the right track. And at this point, let's first of all start off with fantasy baseball hot tips from Tyson. I am starting a guy 1 through 5. I don't care where he is on the rotation. I don't care if he's a spot starter that just came up from the minors. I'm starting him, and I'm starting every pitcher that goes up against the Oakland Athletics. I feel that that is a recipe for success, and you should take that to the bank and run with it as far as you can. It's like literally starting any offensive player that goes up against the Detroit Lions in fantasy football. Generally, it works out pretty well because the Lions have such a shitty defense. Ergo, Oakland, who, by the way, got killed again today, 10-4, 21-62. All of that said,
despite a 7-game win streak this season,
we almost forget that Oakland had a flash of brilliance there at 1 week of this year, and it was probably the only one they're going to get.
That week never happened. They're 14-62.
Does it? My question is, from a confidence level standpoint, and obviously, we can't put ourselves and walk a mile in the shoes of a pitcher who threw a perfect game. But we've all had good outings. You've had good outings on the mound. I've had good days at the plate, although they were very few and far between. It does, when you do something like that, whether it's a perfect game or whether it's just getting a couple knocks, your confidence level and your momentum has an opportunity to change on a dime. This was a guy who was +5 on the ERA, who was getting rocked around a little bit. Does he settle in? Did that give him a shit ton of confidence moving forward that will help continue to be a catalyst for the Yankees this season? I'm saying maybe look out for New York, because they still don't even have, oh, by the way, Aaron Judge is still sitting on the shelf from slamming into the wall at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They still have an opportunity, if they can get the back end of their rotation to start producing at that level. And I'm not saying you throw a perfect game every game, but they would love to. But if you get even a microcosm of that for production value out of the back end of your rotation, sky's the limit. Volpe hasn't played near as well as everybody kind of had the expectations for him. I think that he comes around and probably settles in and has a good second half of the season. We could look back at this as the turning point for New York, especially in a very competitive American League East, and say, this is when they grabbed hold of the division and started to turn things around for the better and for a season that could have serious postseason implications if they can hit the gas.
Yeah, for sure. And, it is odd sometimes, because historically speaking, there has been a bit of a letdown for a lot of guys who have thrown perfect games, right? And there are obviously plenty of exceptions, right? There's 28 now, and 29 actually, I think, in the history of the game. And I'm going to call it 30 because Armando Galarraga threw a fucking perfect game.
Thank you.
Anyway, I
no argument for me on that.
Yeah, I had very, very strong verbal reaction to that when I watched the ending of that game. I still can't believe that guy. Anyway, I won't get too far sidetracked, but some guys have had kind of downturns to their career, whereas other guys have stayed steady Eddie, guys like Coney and Wellesley and, Roy Halladay and, some of the other ones, Burley, et cetera. They've bucked the trend, but there has been a bit of a downturn for guys. And if you're Domingo Germán and you're the New York Yankees and you're the New York Yankees fan base, you have to believe, or you want to believe, that this is going to be him turning the course, because he was a pretty highly touted prospect.
It was.
Who hasn't produced on it, but is this the opportunity? Now, I want to caveat that just a touch. One, you mentioned it's the Athletics. Two, I watched the last 6 outs he made of that game. He hung a lot of shit and was getting fortunate that guys were rolling over stuff and they were missing stuff. So I don't want to jump right into, oh yeah, this is him turning the corner for sure. I hope so, for a young guy who was a really highly touted prospect, although I hate the Yankees, but
Did he hang a lot of shit? Because and I've been in this scenario. Like, you got nothing left in the tank and you're pitching a hell of a game and you're staying in because you're pitching hell of a game and you're potentially going for a milestone. At some point, are you just like, I'm just going to challenge these guys, and if they get a hit, they get a hit, and I can get yanked? Did it seem like it was getting to that stage of the game, in your opinion, or was he still locked in, focused in, and trying to mechanically hit his spots and missed? I think there's 2 ways you can go with it.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of both. I think the backdrop of the perfect game maybe forgives some of that, and I think the fact that he was able to execute and finish the perfect game saves a lot of that. I think in most scenarios, he's probably not in the game that late, right?
Sure.
If it's a one hitter, he's probably not in the game. If it's a 4-1 ball game instead of a 4-0 ball game, right? I don't think he's in that game, because the velo, I think, was still good. He was still, clocking fine on velo, but he was hanging a lot of stuff in the hitting zone that likely against other teams probably would have been pummeled, but also probably would have been a red flag for the pitching coach to say, curveball's not as sharp, changeup's not down in the zone. Let's make a move with this guy. He executed, right? That's the bottom line. I just noticed he was fairly fortunate for the last, 2 innings that were broadcast. They had the cut-ins in the last 2 innings. I don't know what he looked like in innings 5, 6, and 7 when you start to feel the effects of being in the game for a while. But I don't know. It's hard to have that revisionist look at it and say, yeah, in another scenario, this is bad. He got away with them. That's all that matters, right, in the end.
And it also matters that he didn't have Dave Roberts as his manager, because he probably would have been pulled.
Very, very good point. All right. I'm going to ask a favor of you, bud. I got a little kid running around the house.
Yeah, you want me to take it?
Who's supposed to be in bed. So
okay.
I want to see if you want to wax a little bit about mid-season report, maybe, of your
let's do it.
Redbirds.
Let's do it. I'll take my Redbirds. I'll also take the National League in general here,
Awesome.
and talk a little bit about really 3 big storylines and surprises to me. And certainly when we talk about surprises in the National League, there was 3 teams that we had towards the top of the tier in our projected standings, and 3 teams that have been a massive disappointment. One of those, my St. Louis Cardinals. Another one is over in the East in the Big Apple with the New York Mets. And the other one out west in what we all said was supposed to be Slam Diego, and the return of Fernando Tatis, and all of the work that they did last season in the trade deadline to get the players that they brought in, your Josh Hader and your Juan Soto's, and all 3 teams sub 500, all 3 teams playing very poor baseball at the moment. The National League in general, when you look at it from a broad perspective, sure, we talk a lot about the Central of being extremely disappointing, and the fact that St. Louis is as bad as they are is still less than 10 games out of the National League Central. Might be 10 today after Houston finishes this blowout against Jake Woodford and the rest of the St. Louis Cardinals. St. Louis has been disappointing. The Mets have been a disaster of a disappointment in what they had looked to be a race in the East with the Atlanta Braves. They never got out of the gates. San Diego, very similar situation. And now San Diego's in danger because not only out in the West have the Dodgers continue to just play average baseball, Arizona is playing above average baseball and has a chance to win that division. When you take a look at the three biggest disappointments, the three biggest storylines, the Big Apple with the Mets, the St. Louis Cardinals, who I've got to think that we are on the last ride, maybe the last few weeks. I have got to think if they can't start putting wins together, and I don't care how much of a player's manager or baseball guy you are, at the end of the day, wins and losses are paramount. And if you can't get wins, you're out of here, buddy. I think one of those teams between San Diego, the Mets, and the Cardinals, we're going to see a managerial change before the All-Star break. And I've got a feeling that the tension is starting to pick up in St. Louis. And it's a lot sooner for a guy like Ollie than it is for guys like Buck and Melvin, who have been around the game for a long time. Ollie's in crisis mode, and he's got to find a way to pick up some wins and pick them up now. Otherwise, we might have our first coaching change before the break.
Yeah, and I worry as a big fan of Buck Showalter, I do worry that he might be close to.
Yeah.
As much money as they've spent, I know that they're on much firmer financial ground now that the Wilpons are gone, but I've got to think with all of the talent that they've put there, fair or not, they've got aging Max Scherzer, aging Justin Verlander, who I cursed him. I'm sorry, Buck.
Yeah.
I picked him to win the Cy Young, and
You did.
Rosinbaggers curse has totally derailed his season. I've got to think that they are starting to feel like this thing has gone off the rails too far. And to be completely honest, if I'm part of that front office, I'm worried about the fact that I've got $86 million invested in Scherzer and Verlander next year. I don't know what sort of direction we can steer this thing into to say, okay, 2023 was a lost season, but we're going to be back in 2024, right? I just don't know, and I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible, right, with this take, because I said this was going to happen before the season started with the Mets. I thought Verlander would be great, but I thought that they were going to lose a lot of games because they were winning a lot of games last year on fucking pencil sticks and fucking unicorn farts.
I like that.
It's not a great roster. With all the money that they've invested in Diaz and Scherzer and Verlander and Lindor, it's not a great roster. Pete Alonso, fine, he's a great power hitter, but that's all he gives you. He doesn't give you a lot else with his at-bats. He's not a great fielder at first base either. He's above average probably at first base. But I do think that the Mets right now, it's going to start to look like a potential panic. And I know if my dad is watching, I'm not sure if he tuned in tonight because we're off schedule a little bit,
right.
But I know he's happy watching the Mets flounder. But if you're a Mets fan, you've got to feel really, really lost kind of in this thing because you won the division last year.
I'm with you. And I think like one of the main tells for me, and having been through it from a completely different sport, but take college football. And we are very passionate about our college football here in the heartland, especially here in Nebraska. And when the media starts to turn and starts to generate conversation and generate other names and start to put the burner on high, the writing starts to be on the wall. The fan base can say and boo and put bags over their heads all they want, but they don't have the pulse. When the media starts to write other options, and what did we see over the last couple weeks? Cohn coming out yesterday in support of Buck Showalter, saying he's our guy right now, which is a really vague statement when you say our guy right now. Is he going to be the guy tomorrow? We don't know. Guy right now.
You're hedging your bet with right now.
How many how many times, 3 or 4 times this season, that John Mosliak had to come out in support of the direction that Ollie Marmol's going. And then yesterday, the beat writer for the Cardinals on MLB.com, John Denton, is in a question talking about the Giovanni Gallego situation where he left him in one batter too long. And Ollie said very similar comments to what he's done all season was, well, if I'd have known that, obviously we wouldn't have had him in there. And John Denton, to his credit, had the balls to say, well, that's the 4th time this season.
Yeah.
And shut him up. The conversation is being generated. The writing is literally being done to potentially explore other options. I've seen it before with Husker football. I think we're seeing it now with 2 skippers in particular in New York and St. Louis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Stove. Nice little firecracker you brought in here to the studio there, bud.
Thanks for tuning in, Stove.
Thanks for tuning in. Boom, and he's out.
Yeah.
Just like a fire
in the toilet, and he's running out of the bathroom.
Just like a firework. He drops in with a dynamite drop it and then comes right back out.
Oh, shit. Yeah, look, I don't want to comment too hard on the Cardinals because I know that you are tough love on them already. But a couple of things I think have become issues there that I don't know how they rectify them. The Contreras situation, it should have never gotten to where it got. I mean, you sign the guy to be your catcher, you need to put him in a better position to be successful, right? They've been asking too much of him. They've been talking too much about him. You can't publicly come out and say that when your pitching staff literally hinged on like you lost the best pitching coach in baseball.
Yep.
You lost the best pitching coach in baseball. And I feel like Wainwright should be allowed to go out on his own terms, but somebody should have talked to him. Like when girls go out to the club, they talk to each other and say, you're not wearing that to the club, right? You're not going to wear that out tonight, right? Somebody should have talked to Waino and said, listen, you're not going to try to run back the magic of 2022, are you? Are you really going to try to run that back? Because Al's gone, Yachty's gone. What are you doing here? And the pressure that puts on an organization to make sure that he is a starter, that he's going to be able to call it on his own terms, feels like it's more of a detriment to the team. As legendary as Wainwright is in St. Louis, I didn't understand it when he announced last season that he'd be coming back this year, because it felt like last year with Al coming back and with Yachty knowing he's going out, it felt like the perfect opportunity for the 3 horsemen to just ride off into the sunset together. And he came back for another year, and he's not been good enough to justify keeping his spot in the rotation. But because of his status in St. Louis, he continues to get it every 5th day. I think that's part of the problem. I think he's a great locker room guy. Bring him back as a pitching coach, whatever it is, right? If you're going to lose Mike Maddox, bring Adam Wainwright in as the pitching coach. But I just look at that and I say, man, that to me was maybe the biggest move of the offseason, and not in a positive way. And it's unfortunate. We have this often with legends. They just don't know when to go out. They don't know when to go. They stay 1 or 2 seasons too long, and it does feel like that's what happened with Waino. This is a very talented Cardinals team. Right? Mm-hmm. As much as Stove wants to rough them up, right? The girls going out to the club, good reference, right? But as much as Stove wants to rough him up because he's a Cubbies fan, it's a talented roster. You've got 2 former MVPs on the squad. You've got maybe the best defensive squad, one of the few best defensive squads in baseball, and you can't get anybody out. And it's not because of the defense. You just can't get anybody out. And when you do get people out, you can't hit. So it's one of those kind of struggles. I say all that And then I still look at the standings and I say, nobody's fucking running away with the NL Central. Nobody is running away with that division.
And doesn't it feel like St. Louis can do a Cincinnati tomorrow? St. Louis can win 12 of 13 games just like Cincinnati, and they can do it tomorrow. But you've got to put the right guys on the bump at the right time. And right now, I think the biggest thing from the managerial perspective, say all you want about how he is a locker room guy and how he's a player's coach. He doesn't manage the game very well. You should know this, being a Washington football team Commanders fan, about managing games. And Ron Rivera, he doesn't do it very well. They're very similar in that aspect, where you are saying we have got 3 arms in the bullpen who would be better options than rolling out this guy for a 4th day in a row when he's clearly exhausted, struggling, and can't find the zone. And you're going to sit here and pound it until he finds the zone. It doesn't work. You got to move on. You got to go with different options. And to me, it's been game management miscues that have been the biggest miscue of the 2023 season for the Cardinals.
Yeah, you can't make up for them either, right? And
nope.
And God, you don't want a manager that's going to put you in a bad spot. You could have stayed right in baseball too, because Davey Martinez is a fucking trash bag too. We don't have a lot of good coaching fucking examples here in Washington. So, but I do want to finish talking about the Padres. I don't get it. I don't get it, because of all the disappointments, AL and NL together, San Diego's the most surprising to me. And I say that knowing that, like, I had the Cardinals win in their division and I had the Padres as a wild card team, but they're bad. They're really bad. It's not good baseball. They don't take good at bats at the plate. They're making a lot of bonehead plays in the field. I've seen them make like little league mistakes on the base paths. The pitching is okay at times, but then it's not, they can't put it together. And I do feel like you're 100% right that it does feel like there's some warm seats along that bench. And I know it's not necessarily Melly's problem. Like, it's not his fault necessarily, because Soto's bad right now. Manny Machado's pressing. Even Fernando Tatis, for the hot start that he got off to when he came back, he's pressing at times. And I think that's contagious across the organization.
Bingo.
Juan Soto maybe surprises me the most of anybody on this team with what he's not been able to do since he went to San Diego. I chalked up his struggles before the trade with Washington. I chalked those struggles up to him pressing and trying to prove to people that he should be elsewhere. He's been just as bad, if not worse, since the trade in San Diego. A guy who I think should be a perennial 300, 30 home runs, 100 RBI guy, just chalk that up for his swing, his approach at the plate, and his ability to command the strike zone. That should be an automatic slash for him. And it's not. And I don't know what's going on, if he's still somehow pressing or if he just lost it when he was messing around. Yeah, when he was kind of pressing in Washington. But he's been, for me, of all players in the league that have been down this year, he's been the biggest disappointment for me. And I think it's had the biggest impact on his team because he's such a vital piece of that lineup for the Padres.
So let's talk about what expectations can do, not only to a team's mentality in the locker room, but literally due to a team's performance. Think back 2 years ago with the San Diego Padres when they were not expected to contend or even do anything in the West. And I remember how much literal fun this team was having on the diamond, how much flash and fresh
Slam Diego
and fresh air that they brought, and they had swagger and they were just dancing and having a great time. Tatis and Machado looked like two inseparable, let me tell you about my best friend. And then came expectations, and then came arguments, and like you mentioned, there isn't a damn one of them players on San Diego that isn't pressing right now, that isn't trying to do more than their job, that isn't trying to just pay a bill. They're all trying to get them all back, all the games, and you can't get all the games back in one game. You got to chip away. You got to do your job. They got to get back to that fun and free San Diego baseball team that made them a contender in the first place. Because the expectations, I think, that got put on San Diego. And I think in some regards, you could almost say St. Louis is in the same boat. You could almost say that New York is in the same boat, except for New York's always in that boat because the expectations are always high and they never live up to them. So New York's kind of like, it's another day that ends in a Y. But for St. Louis and San Diego especially, there was expectations going into this season that this was going to be the year of the Padre. This was going to be St. Louis winning number 12. And expectations, what do they do to a locker room? What do they do to your performance on the field?
It can be tough, right? And I think the makeup and the chemistry of the locker room is a big deal. And I think that we may look back and say the Tatis injury suspension combination maybe responsible to at least a certain extent for the cascading effects for this team, because when he's out, I've got to press, if I'm Manny Machado, I've got to press, I've got to make up for the bat that we're missing in the lineup. And I'm Juan Soto, I've got to press, I've got to make up. It could be because my JUCO, I was fortunate enough to go to a JUCO that was really successful. And when I got there, they had won basically like a fall or a spring championship every year for, I think it was like 4 years or something prior to me getting there. And we had those expectations from kind of the internal perspective, from the athletics department perspective that we were going to be good. But I think what helped us a lot was that we had guys that were kind of holdovers, despite being a 2-year, process with a JUCO. We had sophomores that had been there the freshman year that had exposure to it and kind of how the process works and that culture, right? And I think that's the bigger piece. And I think for San Diego, and I think in professional sports, maybe in general too, the ethereal or ephemeral nature of rosters can do this to teams sometimes. As a general manager, you go out and you say, I need one more stick in my lineup. Let me just go grab a guy. You don't know how he's going to fit. I need one more arm. Let me just go grab a guy. I think they're running into kind of the confluence of a lot of things that mix together and create like a nasty witch's brew that has created a situation for San Diego where they can't get out of the funk, and they basically lose in spite of wanting to win, right? They feel like they should be winning games, but they don't have whatever that X factor is that's missing from that locker room. I don't know if it's culture. They seem to all get along pretty well. A lot of kind of Latin culture in that locker room. I feel like it should kind of permeate, but the expectations can be heavy. It can be very, very heavy because that team feels like they're a World Series contender.
Mm-hmm.
And that is lofty expectations. And it can be hard to live up to it. And when it starts going bad and you're a team that expects to win, I feel like that has kind of the avalanche effect of really caving in on you. Because we've seen this, right? We've seen this story before with other teams that had high expectations. The dream teams or some of the, Yankees teams that Steinbrenner went out and bought everybody and they couldn't win any games. We've seen this happen. And I think it does have a little bit to do with you're just kind of Frankensteining this thing together as a general manager and not taking into consideration how they're going to fit, how the pieces fit together. Does the puzzle fit together nicely, or does it look like a 3-year-old drew the picture? Ugh. Sometimes that can be. Well, let's shift over to, Aaron. I mean, NBA, right? Super teams look good on paper. I go back to the Dream Team Eagles too, is always kind of my example I like to use when you try to just piece together as many great players as possible. And Vince Young, of course, was never going to start there, but he's the one that said it was a dream team. And they didn't win games. So, NBA super teams as well. You try to get a lot of guys together. There's only one ball. And if you don't know how to share, you don't know how to play together, you don't know how to pull in the same direction, it can go bad for you. Great point, Aaron. Let's shift over to the AL. I want to hear your thoughts because we've sort of got a runaway division where it seems like there's a whole lot of talent collectively.
Mhm.
We've got a real dumpster fire in the middle of the country. The middle of the country baseball right now is not good. Not good. And then you got West Coast where I think the standings are sort of inverted.
Yeah.
Sort of inverted from maybe what a lot of people expected with the AL West. So run me down your thoughts on the AL here, bud.
The West is fun. The West is going to be a really intriguing race to keep an eye on. You have Houston, who continues to sputter, except when they play St. Louis, because they're going to win 2 in a row here.
Yeah.
Houston is sputtered, and Houston is sputtered because Mr. Roboto is not in the lineup. And if you don't have Yordan Alvarez in that lineup playing every day, that's a completely different Houston team. Get him healthy, get him back to playing ball, and I think Houston is going to start mashing again. So I think it's going to be a late 3-horse race with Houston. I don't think Anaheim's going to go anywhere because Shohei has, as opposed to a year ago, where it was Shohei and Trout, and they were putting out utterly worldly numbers, and Anaheim was still finding ways to lose ball games. Other than the series against the Rockies this weekend, where they outscored Colorado by 30 and still lost the series, which is the most Angels headline ever.
Yeah.
I think they're going to find a way to win some games. Now, can anybody stop? Now, we were very impressed, both of us, with Texas in their offseason moves. But I was impressed originally with the rotation that Texas had, where Texas right now is blowing the doors out of the West, is 1 through 9. There isn't a single weak spot in that batting lineup. And oh my God, can they absolutely lay 10 on a team in the blink of an eye? And they're doing it in, quite frankly, a non-friendly hitter's ballpark. They're just mashing the ball all over the yard. You get them on the road, it's even scarier. Texas has flipped the script in terms of what I thought they would be, which was a pitching and defense team, to a team that just crushes. Like, old Stuart Scott says, I'm not a player, I just crush a lot. That's what Texas does right now. And so I still see a 3-horse race in the American League West, and I think that'll be intriguing to see which team, as we move forward towards the trade deadline, presses the green light and makes the first move to try to jump towards the top of the division and run away with it. And then I think it's going to be a domino effect from there, because if you're Houston or Anaheim, you're not going to let Texas make a move. Likewise, if you're Anaheim, you have the opportunity to do what I think is a lot different than what I said at the beginning of the year, where I thought maybe Shohei and Trout get sold. Now I'm saying maybe they're 1 or 2 players away from being American League West champs, and woe is me for being an idiot. Same for Houston. If they make the first move, Anaheim and Texas, you're damn right, they're going to follow suit, and they're going to make this a 3-horse race. The Central, I'm going to bet on Detroit at this point, because I don't think any team wants to win that division more than the Detroit Tigers, who are still 10 games under 500. But I think when you take a look at the roster composition and how young these guys are, it's a sneaky fun team to watch. They don't win a lot of games, but there's a sneaky fun team to watch. And Jesus Christ, it's now 11-0. Listen, Detroit's my dark horse to win the Central because the rest of the Central is so shitty bad. Other than Jose Ramirez, who is the best player on arguably the worst 5-team division that I've ever seen ever. It's not good, and it's not getting better. And you thought Minnesota would maybe flex and run with it with Byron Buxton and some of the offensive players they have, and then Cleveland from the magic that they had in the postseason. Nobody's doing anything right now in the American League Central. The Royals are just as bad, if not worse, than the A's, and the loss of Vinny Pasquantino really, really sunk the sails in Kansas City, because now it's just the Bobby Witt Jr. show, and the guy can't do it all on his own. They've got some young players, some flash and some speed, but it's a
fantasy team too. Vinny P was fucking breaking.
It's a AAA team. I mean, it is what it is. Oakland is a AA team. Kansas City is a AAA team. These are all guys that literally should be playing in Omaha, 14-0. Whatever. We're not keeping score anymore. It's just It is what it is. Get fired tomorrow. I don't care, Ollie.
Yeah.
American League East, I still don't know. Tampa's the best looking team that I see in that division. Toronto certainly has bats, but their pitching has been erratic, and to their credit, their bats have been hot and cold. There's days where Toronto to me is like you mentioned in the sport of basketball, and it's one of those weird scenarios where you just hope that you got one or two guys that stay hot when you have one or two guys that are getting cold. When they're cold, they're 1 through 9 cold. When they're hot, they're 1 through 9 hot. There's no intermittent guys that go on runs or guys that go on streaks or guys that can put the ball out of the yard. It's either all or nothing for the Toronto offense, and that's the best way I can describe them. New York, I still think, has that ability to hit the corner. Unfortunate, really, for Boston. Baltimore might be the story out of that division, though, because, again, that's a team that I didn't see going anywhere. That's a team that I thought was going to be surely sitting in 5th place in that division, maybe racing Boston for 4th. Baltimore's playing great. Baltimore is playing outstanding, and I watched a series that I'm excited about because we haven't mentioned too much about Cincinnati, and we gave Cincinnati a lot of shit for everything that they've done over the course of the last year. In terms of young talent and roster composition and what you have, if you can get the guys to stay in the window of opportunity, which for those markets is so small, especially when you have a dickhead of front office like Cincinnati does. It's a small window. I watched Baltimore and Cincinnati play in a baseball game, and I had fun 2 nights ago. It was an exciting game, and I thought to myself, gee whiz, what if this is the World Series in a year? What if this is the World Series in 2 years? This is going to be exciting to watch these 2 young teams try to contend. And I'll be honest with you, in the East, if there's one team that can chase down Tampa, I think it's in the state of Maryland with the Baltimore O's.
Yeah, for sure. I want to circle back. You mentioned the West, Texas, man. How good has Josh Young been? Just unbelievable. Young guy. And it's a great mix there in Texas, right? With the young and the old. And you don't know if you're ever going to get anything from DeGrom, but they've got pitchers pitching pretty good, but when you're scoring 10, 11, 12 runs a night, you just need guys to go out and fucking eat innings, right? And that's what they've been getting from their pitchers. Texas is unbelievable. My fantasy team appreciates the fact that they have two guys in the top 6 live odds and MVP race. I've got Simeon. I don't have Seager, but Corey Seager's number 2 right now, live odds. MVP. Shohei's running away with it, obviously. But
no one's Shohei. Just give him the American League.
Yeah.
Can we do that? Can we do that in July because he deserves it?
Yeah, because he's literally before July 1st. He's minus 1,400 in a couple of books. His best odds you can get, I was just looking at it. His best odds are on DraftKings at minus 1,200.
Okay, so bet 1,200 to win 100. That sounds like a sure bet.
Oh, absolutely. You want to win $100, I guess you got to put it up. But
don't have $1,200 to give you.
Yeah, just give him the award right now. That's going to be a fun division though, because I think Houston still is not done in terms of at the deadline. I expect them to be a buyer. I expect Texas to potentially look to usurp maybe what Houston's going to do. I think they both could use the same thing, one more starting pitcher. I also think they're both going to be in the market for bullpen arms. So it could be an interesting kind of bidding war between 2 teams in the same division there. The Central, your division leader is fucking 2 games under 500 on July 1st, basically. Like, oh boy, that's really bad. I love watching Detroit because I love watching young, energetic ball players play, and that's why I love Cincinnati in the other league. Young, energetic, and I'd love to see Detroit go on a little bit of a run here, run down the division lead, and if they win that division, I'd be 100% okay.
Absolutely,
for sure. But man, the AL East is just stacked. And you mentioned it, Toronto, right? They could be the hottest team in baseball. They could be the worst team in baseball some nights. They are 10 games out of first place. and 8, I think it was 8 games over 500. Yeah. We literally in the American League could end up with a 90-win team missing the fucking playoffs this year. A 90-win team could potentially, not, it's not a guarantee. We're not on pace for guarantees of 7 90-game winners, but we have the potential for 7 90-game winners and one of them missing out on the playoffs. This should be unbelievable. But yeah, Baltimore. It's for me right now in the American League. It's all about Baltimore. I love what they've done. I love the moves that they didn't make in the offseason because they told us that they liked what they had, and it's paying off for them. We all questioned it, and I think rightfully so questioned it, but they're proving us wrong. And I love watching that. I love when that happens. Keep yours in-house. Let's go win with what we got. We like what we got. We're all we got. We're all we need. Get after it. I do hope that Tampa cools off just enough to make this thing a pennant race in September, but God, they're so good. They are so good.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 90-win team that could potentially miss the playoffs, and if that 90-win team is the Yankees, I think everybody in baseball wins, right? Like that would be the best ideal scenario. Baltimore is really the only team for me that, and I love this because I've taken this in my own life, and how many times do you get doubted on and shit on, and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna bet on myself. To me, Baltimore bet on themselves. They didn't listen to the outside pundits. They didn't listen to the beat writers and all of the studio hosts on the MLB network that says, go after this guy, and this guy's the hottest thing in baseball, and he's the one that you need to go after. And they said, you know what? We're good. We got it. We like our roster composition the way it is, and we're going to go make a run at it. And we're going to save up a little money in case we get to the trade deadline and need somebody. Now they're in perfect position to do that, where a lot of other clubs that made the big splash moves, San Diego, aren't. San Diego might be selling, Baltimore might be buying, and there's some pretty damn good players on that Padres lineup that could float on back out to the East Coast, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. One of them plays third base, right?
Oh, wouldn't that be something?
Oh, man, that'd be crazy. Going back home, right? Yeah, in one team, I don't want to let them off the hook. I was huge on them. All year last year, they were fun to watch. Big on them this year. I thought they were going to really push the AL West and be a wild card team. The Seattle Mariners, man, they have ghosted the entire nation. I don't know what happened. They didn't have a lot of roster upheaval. They didn't try to bring in a bunch of pieces to change things. Jared Kelenic is finally hitting, yet they can't win games. Like Jared Kelenic at one point in the season was raking at an MVP level. He's obviously not maintained that for the entire season, but you're finally getting a good Jared Kelenic and you can't win. I'm disappointed because I want Julio on the biggest stage. I want Julio on TV. I want Julio in the playoffs. But if I'm being honest, Julio is a big part of the problem there. And I know we talked quite a bit about him maybe getting a little disrespect from umpires, but he's not exactly turned the corner. And it could just be a sophomore slump. Could very well be a sophomore slump, and maybe we'll get good Julio back next year. But I'm really worried about the Mariners, and this is the time where in the past, historically, we've seen the Mariners basically fold up shop and start trading people, start selling at the deadline, and go back into perpetual fucking rebuild mode, which isn't what I wanted because that was a young, exciting roster that played in October last year.
Yeah. We talk a lot about windows, right? And windows of opportunities, especially for markets like a Seattle. And I say markets like a Seattle only because of when you compare them to other. Yeah, we've talked about markets being market size, and you can buy anybody you want to. It's just a matter of if you're going to spend the cash or not, right? But Seattle's window is closing rather rapidly on their opportunity to win a championship. And, I think of sophomore slumps and, football comes to mind, right? Like sometimes you see that big lag from year 1 to year 2 and the hype kind of wears off. But I don't really remembering one in the longevity of a 162 game season like the sport of baseball, like we've seen from Julio Rodriguez, to go from literally one of the faces of the young Rushmore of baseball. If you were to watch it this season, having not heard of the hype, or if you were living under a rock last year and didn't know about Julio Rodriguez, you wouldn't be talking about him right now because he's irrelevant. Ty France is irrelevant. There is a lot of players on that Seattle Mariners team that made it really special and fun to watch a year ago. And you said it perfectly, having just recently gone through a ghosting scenario. Thanks to online dating, it sucks, especially at 37. It's ghosting. You feel, from a baseball fan perspective, like you had something special with that Mariners team, and you feel like you got ghosted. That's a perfect way to describe the Seattle Mariners season. I give you props because I hadn't thought of that. That's well done. They've ghosted the entire baseball fan base.
Yeah, you got the Mets on one side of the milk carton and the Mariners on the other. So here's a question from Amy, and I'm going to say emphatically yes, it's always worth it, honestly. Padres-Dodgers is a rivalry, so you're going to have that atmosphere. Yep. You're going to see a lot of stars of the game. Despite the Padres and their struggles, they've still got 4 or 5 guys on that roster that are legitimate stars and legitimate, guys to go watch. And then you've got the Dodgers, right? It's the Dodgers, the history, the Dodger blue, and the stars they've got on their roster as well with Mook and, all the other guys along that roster. It's not quite the Dodgers of 2022, but it is still a star-studded roster. That's a star-studded game. It's also a rivalry atmosphere. And if I'm reading this correctly, it's in LA, which is one of the better historical atmospheres in baseball. Petco's fine in San Diego, but if you're going to LA to watch that game, great atmosphere there with the history of the game at the ballpark. So, Ty, any other thoughts on it?
You could go to Kansas City and Oakland and it would be worth it because you're going to a Major League Baseball game. And that's always going to be my answer. Anytime you have the opportunity to catch a game at the ballpark, especially with the littles and getting them the wide-eyed experience of seeing these superstars up close and in person. Maybe, you go before batting practice and get an opportunity to go down with the Sharpie, and it changes their lives forever when you have your childhood hero sign a baseball glove for you or sign a baseball. And next time, Dad, bring a Sharpie because I really want a Dylan Cruz autograph. No, just kidding. Like that happened last week, right? No, seriously. Anytime you get that opportunity, memories are going to be made forever, and you have the potential to create lifelong baseball fans. But just going to one game, worth it. Even if it was single A ball, it's still worth it.
Yep, absolutely. It's hard to replicate that atmosphere of the ballpark for sure, especially if they're fans, right? If they're fans of either the Padres or the Dodgers, if they're fans of a player on either team or players on both teams, you can't say
Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, right. Freddie, Mookie, all them guys for sure. So 100% take them out to the ballpark for sure. Aaron, I know you live in the San Antonio area, I believe. You mentioned hometown hero there. I believe he's from just outside of San Antonio, Josh Young is. So I know you don't have professional baseball other than minor league baseball in your backyard, but it's worth the trip over to Arlington to catch a Rangers game, or maybe you make the trip out west to Arizona. They've got a great ballpark out there. Definitely get out there, Aaron, for sure. We'll find somebody to take you, right? We'll find you a chaperone.
And this just in, the Texas ballpark and the renovations in Arlington are pretty spectacular to watch on TV. I can't imagine how much fun that would be at a ballpark in person.
Absolutely. All right. So I mentioned earlier, all-star voting results are out. Texas cleaned up. We talked about Texas, 4 starters. Ty, you mentioned you've got a little all-star game to play, a little all-star challenge.
Little Rosinbaggers all-star challenge. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, next Wednesday is July 5th, one day after Independence Day, right? Now, to my knowledge, I think we're still going to miss Stove because he's still making bank with his fireworks, but he can certainly chime in and we can make fun of his selections. I have no problem with that in the chat pod. What I'm curious about, because I will always say this, so long as there's a fan vote for MLB All-Stars, there will always be debate and there will always be snubs. I want a Rosinbaggers All-Star ballot, American and National League roster filled out. First, I mean, all positions, obviously, starting pitcher, relief pitcher, and then all of the position players. Okay, with the caveat, and here's the twist. This is the Rosinbaggers twist coming into play. No one player from the same team.
Ooh, so NBA style, everybody gets one.
Everybody gets one. You can fill out the rest with your bench. You can put your starters, your starting pitcher, your relief pitcher, all the position players. Fill the rest of the bench up with, again, one player per team.
We're talking strategy.
So we're talking, 15 players on each roster. And you got to put them in positions. And we're going to compare between the three teams that get selected, who's got the better all-star squad. And we can leave it up to fan votes that might tune in. But I want Rosinbaggers All-Star Challenge, interactive fans. Next week's pod should be a fun one because we're hitting towards the All-Star break and we need to have a little fun. We've had some serious topics here. We've had some serious health issues. We've had some serious breakups happen. I'm ready for a baseball refreshing pod to get us geared up for All-Star weekend.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Next week, tune in. Rosinbaggers All-Star ballot. Next week, all the hot debates, all the heated discussion about who messed up here and who did right there. Absolutely. July 5th. Tune in. Be there or be square.
Or be round like me.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with being round. Round's a shape. I'm in shape, damn it.
Yes.
Let's go.
It is a shape. Absolutely.
Amy's all about it.
All right. So let's bring this thing home, buddy. What you got for me? Closing comments. We've kind of been focused on the College World Series now for the last 3 weeks. We've wrapped up the College World Series. We are getting to the dog days of summer for baseball. All-Star games around the corner. Trade deadline coming up, and we're going to start talking about pennant races down the stretch. What you got for me? Closing thoughts here, bud.
I always look forward to July because I always look forward to the All-Star break because it is such a stark contrast from the everyday grind of the Major League Baseball season. And I love the way that the two worlds with college baseball and Major League Baseball seem to collide. And obviously this year could be a completely different scenario for me since my enjoyment of the Major League side of things has been drastically reduced. And anybody that's going through a situation like what St. Louis is going through, when you had certainly expectations to be in contention and you're not, can sympathize. But it's an everyday grind, and it gets to the point where it's like, you know what? If I miss a game here and there, no big deal. And then you realize you've missed 7. And then enter the college baseball realm, which takes you on an amazing 2.5-week journey from regionals to super regionals all the way to the College World Series. Takes you out to Omaha, and you get such a refreshing cleansing of the baseball soul because it is played at such a high energy level every single pitch. Whereas you're watching baseball in mid-June and they're taking pitches off, they're taking plays off, they're taking innings off, it seems like, for Christ's sake. And then you have players that are in every single pitch, locked in and playing the game at the highest caliber level. And you get the stories like the Oral Roberts, and you get the fan bases like LSU who traveled to Omaha by the thousands and turned Omaha purple and gold all weekend. Special stuff. And then right after the College World Series enters the guys back and relaxing and having fun in the majors because they're kicking back and watching the best hitters in baseball hit dingers. Vlad Guerrero Jr. signed up. He's going to put on a show at the All-Star game here coming up this year. And you get the All-Star break, and you get the celebrity softball game. And it's like, this is refreshing. We don't have to worry about the rise and grind of the standings anymore. We don't have to worry about the everyday who's on the injured list, who's coming up, who's getting called back, sent down, called up. We just get to relax and have fun again. And that recharges the batteries for half number 2, which is the trade deadline, which is the pennant races, which is where everything culminates and gets exciting in this sport. This is a much needed break. And the fact that we're going to dramatically kind of shift our general structure on the pod to pay tribute to that, and the fact that you guys with Stove have been really taking the last 2 and been talking college baseball, it's really helped refresh my batteries internally to get ready for a strong second half of the pod.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good recentering. It's a good recharging of the batteries. There are 2 days on the calendar, 2 days out of the year that there are no games in the 4 major sports. And it's fitting that you mentioned it as a recharging of the batteries, because those 2 days are the day before and the day after the Major League All-Star break. So it's almost like the calendar is telling us, get ready for something big. Recharge during the All-Star break, because we're getting into the stretch run. Have fun. Enjoy the home run derby. Enjoy the All-Star game with the new rules and everything that goes into it. It's fresh. It's new. Recharge your batteries, because we're about to gear up for a nice little stretch run to October.